Welcome back to the Florida History Podcast. I'm Carter Krishnaiyer. Robert Buccellato will be back next week. And I wanted to kind of bridge our ongoing American Revolution series, the attempted invasions of East Florida that we've talked about in the last 4 episodes, the last 4 weeks, with a conversation about the period of time when Charleston and Savannah were occupied by the British. And in fact, St. Augustine then became an even more important kind of connected community where the British had a loyalist base and a place where they could send prisoners. And so this episode is based on, and much of the research in the book Robert and I co-wrote came from a book called Patriots in Exile, Charleston Rebels in St. Augustine During the American Revolution by James Waring McCready and C.L. Bragg. And this is published by the University of South Carolina Press. It's just a fantastic book about a period of history, or not a period of history. I know a lot about that period of history, always knew a lot, but a specific part of history that I did not know. And in fact, I stumbled upon this book at the gift shop at a plantation in Charleston several years ago when I had gone into the gift shop with my wife and our niece. My niece and I had just done a walk through the plantation, and we were, quite frankly, this was something I was kind of embarrassed about personally. Here's some personal baggage. There was a tour guide there who was doing a guided tour and said, watch out for the alligators. And I said, look, I go hiking in Florida all the time. I hike in Big Cypress. I hike in the Glades. I'm not scared of alligators, okay? I walk right by them. They don't faze me. But the Ashley River, it's a plantation on the Ashley River, the number of gators in the river, I hadn't seen in even things like the Kissimmee River or the Myakka River. Well, maybe the Myakka River is kind of the closest I'd seen to it. But the Myakka River and all these rivers in Florida. I mean, another one, St. John's, you see gators, but you don't see the amount of, like, the concentration of alligators. Saw walking along near the Ashley River, the heads of the alligators, and then on the grounds, like just in the, if you're not looking, you would have stumbled over one of them, and that would have been it, right? So I was recovering from that, like, oh wow, even as an experienced hiker in Florida, this Charleston area, and I know that from the golf courses in South Carolina in the past along the coast, in the Low Country, that they're filled with gators, just like the golf courses here in Florida. But that plantation, quite frankly, the concentration of alligators I had never seen in Florida or Louisiana, except when you would see these, you go to a springs area and the gators are all trying to get to the warm water, but not I never seen a concentration of alligators moving as much as I did at Middleton Place. That was the name of the plantation. It just occurred to me, in Charleston. So anyway, I got this book, Patriots in Exile, and it became the basis for my understanding of this topic that we're going to talk about today. And the chapter, or not the chapter, but the portion of the book that Robert and I have written about the American Revolution. And the portion about the prisoners in St. Augustine that were brought from Charleston. There is a historic marker in the plaza in St. Augustine that you can see if you go to St. Augustine, which says prisoners of war in St. Augustine during the American Revolution. From the onset of the American Revolution in 1775, the British Crown colony in East Florida was a loyalist bastion. In its capital, St. Augustine, the British lodged as prisoners many American patriots and their French allies. Most of these prisoners were given the liberty of the town, but some were held in the Castillo de San Marcos. A few, Fort St. Mark is what it was called, actually, during the Revolution. That was the British name. and the American name, by the way, was Fort Marion until it reverted to Castillo de San Marcos, I think in 1947 or so. A few captives were rented quarters, but most of the men were housed in the unfinished state house, which stood near this spot, which is in the plaza, by the Peca Pena house and government house. By the end of 1780, these prisoners, which included 3 signers of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Hayward, Arthur Middleton, and Edward Rutledge, on July 4th, 1781, the Patriot captives celebrated Independence Day, the 5th anniversary of Independence Day, the 4th of July. So, as noted in that inscription in downtown St. Augustine, St. Augustine was the home to several prisoners from Charleston after the British recaptured the city of Charleston in May of 1780. The British arrested 65 patriots and paroled them to St. Augustine in August of the same year, in August of 1780. Many loyalists in Charleston who felt they had suffered the previous 5 years of patriot rule encouraged the British to make these arrests and to deport these people. So it was this was a civil war. We have to remember that. It's so often not represented as this in terms of the way people characterize the American Revolution, that it was some great rebellion, that all the people rose up against the colonial master. No, as we know, I think there probably were more patriots than loyalists. And then there were a lot of people who were just agnostic, if you want to call it that, between the two sides. But there were lots and lots of loyalists. Maybe 40% were patriots, 25% were loyalists. And what does that leave us? That leaves us with 35% who were agnostic, maybe. Or maybe 30% were loyalists and 30% were agnostic. Maybe it was 40, 30, 30, something like that. And in the South in particular, there were more loyalists than in the North. So, like I said, the loyalists in Charleston felt like they had suffered under Patriot rule, and they encouraged the arrests and deportations. In a future episode that Robert and I do, ironically, we're going to talk about many of these loyalists in Charleston would move themselves to St. Augustine within about 15 months, once it was clear that South Carolina was going to be part of the United States in a peace agreement. Included in those arrested and paroled to St. Augustine were 3 signers of the Declaration of Independence. We've already mentioned them: Edward Rutledge, Arthur Middleton, and Thomas Hayward Jr. Additionally, the colony's Patriot political corps was basically rounded up by the British and sent to St. Augustine. This included the lieutenant governor, the attorney general, and many of their elected legislators in their provincial colonial legislature. When arrested, the Patriots assumed they'd be thrown in the exchange cellar in Charleston. But they weren't. Instead, they were rowed by boat down the Cooper River to a waiting ship, the HMS Lord Sandwich. Now, you can imagine where this is. If you know where Patriots Point is, in Mount Pleasant in Charleston, where I often have to go because that's where the Charleston Battery now play, a USL club I cover, professionally as a journalist. My day job, right? So Patriots Point is right there. You go under the Arthur Ravenel Bridge, the huge cable-stayed bridge that replaced the older, very scary Cooper River bridges that used to be there. The Ravenel Bridge, under that goes to Cooper River. It's kind of an estuary at that point. It becomes a kind of a more of a freshwater river a little further upstream. So picture that, rowing them to there, and then there's a big ship waiting, basically where Patriots Point is today. And that's the HMS Lord Sandwich. And it hauls all of these guys off, all this human cargo off to St. Augustine. I believe they were all men, the prisoners. Now, once they got to St. Augustine, most of the prisoners were given the run of the town and freedom, but were watched very suspiciously, and informants were, paid to spy on them. The area they were allowed to roam in the town was bounded on the north by the city gates or the town gates. The south by the plaza, where that thing stands now, that historic marker. On the west by St. George's Street, and on the east by the Matanzas River. So that's a very small area. If you think by the west St. George's Street, you basically have 2 blocks. That's it. So much of the town was off limits to them. But still, there's a lot in that area, right? If you think about north to city gates, just picture St. Augustine today. On the south side, you've got the plaza, Plaza de Constitución, as it became known in the second Spanish period. And you have a couple streets, and you have 4 or 5 cross streets going north from the plaza, past the church, up to the city gates. So yeah, I mean, it's not much area. It's not a large footprint, but still there's some stuff there. One exception to this generally lenient policy was South Carolina Lieutenant Governor Christopher Gadsden, who I mentioned earlier, was hauled away. He was singled out for insubordination by Governor Tonin and was thrown in the dungeon cellar at Fort St. Mark, which of course is the Castillo, for 42 weeks. So that's a political prisoner right there. That's a political prisoner. Given the aristocratic backgrounds of most of these patriots, it's no shock they actually bonded with some of the local loyalists, who were all basically aristocratic. Spencer Mann, a local St. Augustine attorney who harbored patriot sympathies himself, rented a residence to some of the prisoners. Mann was actually viewed suspiciously, like many local residents, by Governor Tonin. Mann was a guy that was needed by the governor, though, so he couldn't do anything about it. He was one of the few financial giants, the titans in St. Augustine, often lending the government money to pay the free blacks. He paid for a lot of the free blacks to get paid. And that allowed the free blacks to construct the town walls and shore up Fort St. Mark, the Castillo, and other parts of the town. Remember, a lot of these free blacks are runaway slaves who have been promised their freedom. So now they're free, they get paid, right? They're not slaves anymore, you have to pay them. This is the guy that paid a lot of them, Mann. But he had patriot sympathies. So he was particularly friendly with Rutledge. In July 1781, the decision was made by Governor Tonin and the British military authorities. Let's move these prisoners and let's get them out of here, because they are potentially compromising our own residents as they're becoming friendly. So many were moved back to Charleston, but some were taken to Philadelphia at that point. Obviously, Yorktown happens in October 1781, and some of these people became leaders in the state of South Carolina. Although I guess we would call it still the province until we had the U.S. Constitution. But in the Articles of Confederation period, many of these prisoners became once again leading political figures in South Carolina.